My sister, who stole my dream job after sab-taging me, walked into my office laughing. She said, still crying over that interview? Her new boss added, "You were never CEO material." Then my assistant whispered, "The board's ready for you, Madam Chair." Minutes later, their jaws dropped as reality hit hard. You ever wake up and just know in your bones that today's going to change everything? That was me, sitting in my office on the 42nd floor of the Larkspur building in downtown Chicago, staring out at the lake through the huge glass windows, wondering why my coffee tasted like crap. Maybe it was because my stomach had been in knots for the past 3 days. Maybe it was because today was the day the board voted on the new chair of Eastwood Holdings. And maybe it was because deep down, I already knew something ugly was about to happen. I checked my phone for the 100th time. No new messages. No congratulations. No warnings. Just the blinking red of a new email from HR about pending transitions. Cryptic and cold, like everything else lately. I sighed and rubbed my temples. I'd worked for this moment for 15 goddamn years. I knew this company inside and out, blood and bone. I stayed late. I missed holidays. I held the line when half of management jumped ship during the last recession. If anyone deserved to be chair, it was me. And then, the door swung open without a knock. In walked Nora. Seeing her in my office after everything felt like getting slapped across the face with a frozen fish. Sharp, cold, and a little humiliating. "Still crying over that interview, Mal," she said, smiling like she just won the lottery and knew I had the losing ticket in my hand. I stared at her, too stunned to speak for a second. She looked good, of course. She always did. Tailored navy suit, perfect blowout, lipstick just the right shade of "Don't FCK with me." But her eyes were mean. Meaner than I remembered. "What the hell are you doing here, Nora?" I finally managed to say, keeping my voice calm because I knew that's what she wanted, to see me rattle. Before she could answer, another figure appeared behind her. Julian Crane. The newly minted president of Eastwood, smug as ever, wearing one of those overpriced watches that screamed bonus money spent poorly. "She's with me," Julian said, clapping a hand on Nora's shoulder like they were a team. "Thought you should meet your new director of strategy." I felt my jaw clench. Hard. "Interesting," I said lightly. "Didn't realize we were hiring saboteurs now." Nora laughed, a high, cold sound that grated down my spine. "You never had the KLLer instinct, Mal," she said, leaning casually against my desk. "You always thought hard work and loyalty would save you." So naive. Julian chuckled along with her, the two of them looking at me like I was a sad little relic from a company that didn't exist anymore. I wanted to throw my coffee in his face. Instead, I set the mug down very carefully and said nothing. Brielle, my assistant, popped her head in, her eyes flicking nervously between the three of us. "Miss Hart," she said, her voice steady but her hands tight on the doorframe, "the board's ready for you." "Madam Chair." The room went still. Nora's smirk twitched. Julian blinked like he couldn't process the words. I stood up slowly, savoring the moment, and brushed past them without a second glance. "Don't let my coffee get cold," I said over my shoulder. Brielle bit her lip to keep from laughing as we walked down the hall. Inside the boardroom, it was all smiles and handshakes. Mr. Beckman, the chairman, gave me a nod that said "good job, kid," without needing words. The vote was over. I had won, but it wasn't luck. And it sure as hell wasn't loyalty that got me there. It was survival. Funny thing is, if you asked me 2 years ago if I ever thought Nora would stab me in the back, I would have laughed in your face. We were close once. Really close. Grew up in Oak Park in this slightly falling apart colonial house with blue shutters and a backyard full of weeds we called the jungle. Nora was the golden child. No exaggeration. Straight A's, prom queen, scholarship to Cornell. I was the steady one. The helper. The one who cleaned up after her when she left a mess. It didn't really bother me, not back then. I figured we each had our lane. She was the star, I was the foundation. After college, I went straight into Eastwood, starting at the bottom, clawing my way up. Nora bounced around, always chasing the next shiny opportunity: New York hedge funds, tech startups in San Francisco, a consulting firm in Boston. Dad called her his little whirlwind and said I was his rock. But when Dad stepped down and left it to the board to pick a new chair, suddenly the whirlwind wanted a piece of the family legacy. I didn't even know she was applying until it was too late. The day of the final interview, I was confident. Nervous, sure, but confident. I'd spent the last year prepping for that moment, building the right relationships, proving my worth. And then HR called me into a meeting room, faces tight and fake friendly, and showed me an email. An email supposedly from me badmouthing several board members. I was blindsided. It was full of phrases I would never use. Complaining about Mr. Beckman's senility, calling Mrs. Anders a dinosaur, criticizing Julian's lack of vision. It was ugly, and it looked authentic. I stammered. I cried. I denied. But the damage was done. I lost the chair vote by a landslide. I spent 3 months in Hill after that, trying to prove my innocence, trying to figure out how it had happened. It was Shane, my old friend in IT, who saved me. He pulled me aside one afternoon, looking guilty as Hill. I shouldn't tell you this, he said, glancing over his shoulder, but the email? The metadata shows it was written on Nora's laptop. Like, literally logged in with her credentials. It felt like the ground cracked open under me. I confronted her at Dad's house the next night. It was freezing, one of those bitter Chicago nights where the air hurts your face. I remember standing on the porch, fists clenched, heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Nora answered the door in a silk robe, holding a glass of red wine like she was the queen of the goddamn world. "Mel," she said, surprised, "what are you doing here?" I shoved the printout into her chest. "You did this to me," I said, my voice low and shaking. "You framed me." She stared at the paper. No panic. No apology. Just a slow, infuriating shrug. "You weren't ready," she said simply, like that explained everything. Dad shuffled into the hallway behind her, wearing his old Bears sweatshirt and slippers. He looked between us, confused. "Girls? What's going on?" "She sabotaged me," I said, voice breaking. "She sent fake emails to the board to screw me over." Dad's face changed. He looked at Nora, waiting for her to deny it. She didn't. Instead, she sipped her wine and said, "Business is business, Daddy." And then she walked away. Dad didn't say anything. He didn't yell. He didn't demand she apologize. He just stood there, looking tired and old, and then he turned and followed her into the living room. Like always. I stood there on the porch, shaking with rage and heartbreak, until the cold finally forced me back to my car. I changed after that night. I moved out of my SHTY Logan Square apartment to a high-rise by the lake. I started therapy. I got meaner. Smarter. I stopped trusting people blindly. And I started keeping receipts. Emails, texts, deals, side comments. I documented everything. Nora and Julian were too arrogant to notice. They thought I was finished. They thought I was the same naive little sister they could walk over forever. They didn't see me coming. So there I was, 2 years later, walking out of the boardroom with the chair titles stitched into my future, watching Nora and Julian practically combust in the hallway. "You think this is over?" Nora hissed, grabbing my arm as I passed. I pulled free, slowly, deliberately. "No," I said. "It's just starting." Brielle, bless her, handed me a thick folder labeled Internal Review Findings. "Legal's ready whenever you are," she whispered. I flipped the folder open casually. Inside was every shady deal Julian had signed off on, every conflict of interest Nora had hidden. The proof of everything they'd done, lined up and indexed. Julian's face turned the color of spoiled milk. "And me?" I just smiled. "Security will be up in 10, I said lightly. "You might want to start packing." Nora opened her mouth, probably to spit some venom, but she was interrupted by the ding of the elevator doors. 2 men in black suits stepped out, looking serious. Brielle stepped aside to let them through. Nora stood frozen for half a second before her face hardened into something cold and bitter. She turned her glare on me, but I didn't flinch. Julian, on the other hand, looked like he might throw up. His eyes darted around the hallway, looking for an escape route that wasn't there. One of the security guys stepped forward, holding out a hand. "Mr. Crane, Ms. Hart," he said, voice polite but firm, "we're going to need you to come with us to collect your personal items." "You can't be serious," Nora snapped, her voice shrill now, losing that fake sweetness she usually wore like a second skin. "Mallory, this is a mistake. You can't do this." I tucked the folder under my arm and raised an eyebrow. "You wanted to play games, Nora. You just forgot who taught you the rules." Julian opened his mouth to argue, but Brielle, who was absolutely loving this more than she should, held up a tablet. "Mr. Crane," she said crisply, "your company devices have already been locked. IT will assist you with account transitions." Julian deflated right there, like someone stuck a pin in his ego. I turned and walked away before either of them could say anything else. It wasn't about gloating. It wasn't about revenge. It was about moving on. I made it halfway down the hall before my hands started shaking. I ducked into the bathroom, locked the door, and leaned against the cool marble wall. It was over. Or at least, this part was. I took a few deep breaths, trying to steady myself. I thought I'd feel victorious, triumphant. But what I really felt was tired. So tired. Brielle texted me a minute later. Board wants to debrief when you're ready. Of course they did. I splashed some cold water on my face, reapplied my lipstick, and forced myself to smile at my reflection. You wanted this, I whispered to myself. Now go take it. The next few hours were a blur of meetings, handshakes, awkward congratulations, and polite fake smiles. Mr. Beckman pulled me aside at one point, his lined face serious. You did good work, Mallory, he said gruffly. Hard work. You earned this. Thank you, I said, trying to mean it. He squeezed my shoulder. Don't let it make you soft. They'll come at you harder now. I nodded, knowing he was right. Once you take the throne, everyone wants to pull you down. Later that night, I sat alone at the bar across the street, nursing a whiskey on the rocks. The city lights blurred a little at the edges. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was relief. My phone buzzed. Dad. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Hey, I said, my voice coming out hoarse. Hey, kiddo, he said, like nothing had happened. Like Nora hadn't tried to destroy me and he hadn't just stood there. I heard, he said after a pause. Yeah. I traced the rim of my glass with a finger. It's done. He sighed. Nora called me. Said you set her up. I barked out a laugh, bitter and sharp. Of course she did. I don't know what to believe anymore, Mal, he said, sounding old. So old. I just wish you two would stop fighting. I squeezed my eyes shut. We're not fighting, Dad, I said quietly. She made her choices. He didn't answer for a long time. I miss when you girls were little, he said finally. Before all this. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yeah, I said. Me too. We hung up without saying goodbye. I stayed at the bar until closing, nursing the same drink, watching the world move on outside the windows. Everyone always moves on. Even when your world's in pieces. The next morning, I walked into the office like nothing happened. Heads turned. Whispers floated around me like smoke. Some people looked at me with respect. Some with fear. A few with outright resentment. I ignored them all. Brielle met me by the elevators, looking sheepish. You might want to see this, she said, holding out her phone. It was a post on some finance gossip blog. Blood feud at Eastwood Holdings. Sister versus sister showdown ends in corporate takeover. Complete with an unflattering picture of me and Nora at a charity event 2 years ago, both of us fake smiling for the cameras. I stared at it, then handed the phone back. Schedule a press conference, I said. It's time we control the narrative. Brielle grinned like Christmas had come early. Already ahead of you. I couldn't help but smile back. If they wanted a villain, I'd give them one. But on my terms, the press conference was BRTL. Reporters packed the small auditorium like vultures, shouting questions before I even reached the podium. Miss Hart, what really happened with Julian Crane? Did you sabotage your own sister to get the chair position? Is Eastwood Holdings stable under your leadership? I raised a hand, and the room fell into a tense, eager silence. My sister and I have had our differences, I said, voice steady, but Eastwood Holdings has always been, and will continue to be, committed to integrity and growth. A dozen flashes went off. As for my leadership, I continued, I invite you to watch our next quarter earnings report. Another flash. And Julian Crane's departure was a result of an internal audit that uncovered violations of company policy, I added, letting the words hang heavy in the air. I take these matters very seriously. The questions kept coming, but I stayed calm, controlled, like I'd practiced in front of my bathroom mirror 100 times. Afterward, as I walked off stage, my hands were still shaking, but I forced a smile for the cameras. Fake it till you make it, right? That night, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. You think this is over? Watch your back. No name. No signature. But I didn't need one. I knew it was Nora. Of course it was Nora. I stared at the text for a long minute, the screen lighting up my dark living room. Outside, the wind howled against the glass like some kind of warning. I didn't respond. I wasn't stupid enough to start a paper trail with Nora. Instead, I blocked the number, tossed my phone onto the couch, and leaned back, staring up at the ceiling. She wouldn't give up. Not Nora. She didn't know how to lose gracefully. She didn't know how to lose, period. There was a part of me, some small, bitter part, that almost respected her for it. But the bigger part of me was just tired. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of wondering when the next shot would come. The next morning, Brielle caught me as I walked into the building. "You're gonna love this," she said, falling into step beside me, her heels clicking rapidly on the marble floor. I raised an eyebrow. "Can't wait." She handed me a thick envelope. Inside were printed screenshots. Lots of them. Anonymous posts on finance forums. Tweets. Reddit threads. All hinting that I'd slept my way to the top. That I'd framed Julian. That I was under investigation for financial misconduct. All bull SHT. But dangerous bull SHT. I flipped through the pages, my heart beating faster with each one. "You think Nora's behind this?" Brielle asked quietly. I didn't even have to think about it. "Who else?" I muttered. I tossed the envelope onto my desk and sat down hard. For a second, I just stared at it, the bile rising in my throat. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She wanted to destroy me. At lunch, I met with Clara Reyes, our head of PR, in a booth at a quiet steakhouse 2 blocks from the office. She slid into the seat across from me, her black leather notebook already open. "You're under attack," she said, skipping all pleasantries. "Tell me something I don't know," I said dryly. She tapped her pen against the notebook. "We have 2 options, ignore it and hope it dies, or go nuclear." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Define nuclear." "Official lawsuit against whoever's posting this SHT, she said. "Subpoenas to trace the sources. Public statement reaffirming your integrity. Maybe even a character campaign." I stared at her. "You mean, like, me kissing babies and petting puppies?" She smiled faintly. "If it works." I rubbed my temples. The thought of dragging this out in public made my stomach churn. But if I didn't fight back, she'd win. She'd always win. "Do it," I said finally. "Burn it down." Clara nodded once, sharply. "You got it." The next few weeks were hell. The anonymous attacks didn't stop. If anything, they escalated. Fake emails. Deepfake videos. Whisper campaigns. Every day was a new fire to put out. And every day, I got stronger. Harder. Meaner. I stopped flinching when people looked at me funny. I stopped caring what they whispered behind my back. I was done playing the good soldier. One rainy Thursday, Brielle rushed into my office, practically tripping over her heels. "You need to see this," she panted, holding up her iPad. I took it from her, my stomach already tightening. It was a news alert. Breaking. Eastwood Holdings whistleblower alleges fraud at highest levels. And underneath it, a picture of Nora, sitting primly at a conference table, looking for all the world like a concerned citizen doing her civic duty. I slammed the iPad down hard enough to make Brielle jump. "Get legal," I snapped. "Now." Brielle bolted. We spent the next 6 hours in conference rooms with the legal team, parsing through the allegations. It was all lies. Every single word. But it didn't matter. In business, perception is reality. And right now, the perception was that Eastwood was rotten at the core. Thanks to my sister. That night, I drove to Dad's house again. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe some kind of support. Some kind of acknowledgement. But when he opened the door, his face was tired. Worn down. "Mal," he said, like my name was an ache. "Can I come in?" I asked. He stepped aside. The house smelled like coffee and old books. Same as always. But it felt different. Smaller. Heavier. I sat on the worn leather couch, the same one Nora and I used to build forts on as kids. Dad sat across from me in his old recliner, hands clasped between his knees. "I saw the news," he said quietly. "Yeah," I said. "You think she's behind it?" I gave him a look. He sighed. "She's still your sister, Mal." "No," I said, my voice sharper than I meant. "She's not. Not anymore." He flinched, like I'd slapped him. "She's angry," he said after a pause. "Feels like she was pushed out." "She pushed herself out," I said. "She made her choices." Dad stared at the floor. "I just wish you two could fix this," he said finally. I stood up, my hands shaking with rage and sadness. "I spent years covering for her," I said, my voice breaking. "Years trying to fix things. She never once tried to fix anything for me." Dad looked up at me, his eyes shining. "I know," he whispered. It was the closest he ever came to taking my side. But it wasn't enough. It was too little, too late. I walked out without another word. When I got back to my condo, soaked to the skin from the rain, there was another text waiting for me. Another unknown number. You're not the only one who knows how to play dirty. Hope you're ready. No signature. Didn't need one. I stood there in my kitchen, dripping rainwater onto the tile, staring at that message. I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. If Nora wanted war, she was going to get one. And this time, I wasn't pulling any punches. The next few days moved fast. Too fast. The board started to get twitchy after Nora's whistleblower stunt. Even though the allegations were false, the board hated noise. They hated headlines. They hated anything that made investors nervous. Mr. Beckman called me into his office late Friday afternoon. I sat across from him, legs crossed, hands calm in my lap, even though inside I was vibrating. You need to end this, Mallory, he said, voice low and tired. I'm trying, I said through gritted teeth. But I can't end it alone. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. There's a shareholder meeting next week, he said. You handle that convincingly and this goes away. I understood what he was really saying. If I didn't crush it, they'd crush me. That weekend, I barely slept. I went over every number, every slide, every talking point until I could recite them in my sleep. Brielle and Clara camped out in my condo, running drills, prepping for every possible question, every possible ambush. If she shows up? Clara asked Saturday night, looking up from her laptop. She will, I said. Then be ready. The morning of the shareholder meeting, I dressed carefully. Not flashy. Not soft. Strong. Simple black suit. Crisp white shirt. No jewelry except a small silver watch Dad gave me when I got my MBA. Brielle met me in the lobby, looking nervous, but excited. You've got this, she said. I nodded once, sharply, and walked into the lion's den. The room was packed. Cameras, reporters, board members, shareholders. And in the very back, sitting like she owned the place, was Nora. She caught my eye and gave me a tiny, mocking smile. I didn't smile back. Instead, I walked straight to the podium, clicked the mic on, and started speaking. I didn't talk about the drama. I didn't talk about the rumors. I talked about the future. Growth projections. Expansion plans. New partnerships already inked. Every number, every detail, clean and tight, and unimpeachable. I made it clear, Eastwood Holdings was stronger than ever, and it would stay that way. When I finished, the room was silent for a beat. Then Mr. Beckman started clapping. Slow, deliberate. One by one, the others followed. Within seconds, the whole room was on its feet, applauding. I caught Nora's face just as the cameras flashed. She was furious. She tried to hide it, but I saw it. For the first time in her life, she realized she couldn't touch me. Afterward, as the crowd broke up and people filtered out, she cornered me near the elevators. You think this is over? She hissed. I smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It is for you. She laughed, short and harsh. You think you won because you gave a good speech? You're still the same pathetic little sister, chasing my shadow. I leaned in, close enough that only she could hear. You're wrong, I said quietly. I stopped chasing you a long time ago. She pulled back like I'd slapped her. Enjoy the view from the bottom, Nora, I said as the elevator doors slid open. And then I walked away. The fallout was BRTAL for her. Over the next few weeks, the internal investigation wrapped up. The anonymous posts were traced to burner accounts tied to Nora's laptop. The legal team had receipts. Full documentation. She lost her consulting contracts. She lost her reputation. She lost everything she thought made her untouchable. Eastwood Holdings issued a formal statement clearing me of any wrongdoing and reaffirming the company's stability under my leadership. The stock price went up. The gossip blogs moved on to juicier scandals. And me? I got back to work. Real work. One evening, a month later, I was sitting in my office, looking out at the lake as the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink. Brielle knocked and peeked in. Press wants a comment on Nora, she said. Her PR team's pitching a redemption story. I smiled slightly. Let them. She blinked. You sure? I turned back to the window. Yeah, I said. Let her chase headlines. I'm building something real. Brielle smiled and left me to my view. I leaned back in my chair, letting the peace settle into my bones. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't fighting to survive. I was living. And it felt damn good.